Thank you, Honourable Speaker. On the face of it, this bill would appear to be administrative in nature. Certainly the short duration of the minister's speech would indicate that he thinks so. We, on this side of the House, certainly are interested in exploring this, and it is with some regret that I have to state that it would be a lot easier for us to determine exactly what our position is on this bill and what the possible implications of it might be if the minister's staff at any time in the previous 2 weeks had responded to our repeated requests for a briefing on the bill, only to schedule one last Friday for tomorrow after the bill is scheduled for second reading today. So we await that briefing, and the result of the briefing we receive tomorrow will help us to understand the implications, both short-term and long-term, of this bill in some greater detail. Certainly not enough information in the minister's comments today for us to determine that. The minister, as I said, and the government have described this bill as simply administrative, but it potentially could have some significant effects and certainly deals with key assets such as the Expo and Millennium lines. I note that the Transportation Financing Authority is run entirely by the ministry, in fact almost solely under the control of the minister and the minister's deputy. That doesn't, in fact, lend itself to dealing with the significant issues that members of the public have raised in this time of a TransLink referendum, a referendum on funding of TransLink, where much focus has been on the accountability of TransLink, or the lack of accountability of TransLink, certainly the lack of transparency and accountability of the TransLink board. This will do nothing to that. The sole director of the Transportation Financing Authority is the minister. The DM, as the deputy minister, is the chief executive officer. Certainly in terms of the government reporting entity, there will be no change through these transfers. So we see no significant implications there. The minister states that he made a commitment to this transfer for a number of reasons, including efficiencies and control over management and operations in estimates. I must admit that I thought perhaps the minister may have reacted with some shock when he heard the Premier state that TransLink was completely under control of the mayors, and thought perhaps by bringing in legislation like this he could put a stop to that. It's clear that notwithstanding the fact that the minister wishes to have greater control over management and operations of TransLink, he has no compunction whatsoever about continuing to fail to work with the mayors of the region over appropriate funding for TransLink improvements. So I wonder what exactly the end result of this will be. For instance, we're currently undergoing a referendum in the Lower Mainland over. I understand that the Minister of Education is correcting my language. I'm simply referring to his government's election promise to hold a referendum, so I will use them somewhat interchangeably, although I do understand that the significant difference is a plebiscite is non-binding and a referendum is binding, so which does lead me to question whether the Minister of Education and the Minister of Transportation and the rest of Cabinet believe that by changing to a plebiscite they're actually keeping the election promise that they claim is underlying the whole purpose of the referendum/plebiscite. Or if in fact the government intends to abide by the result of the plebiscite, or in fact go a step further and indicate to the people of Metro Vancouver that if they decide to pay a bit more for transit investments through in addition to the sales tax or congestion relief tax, or whatever the minister has chosen today to call it, or might choose to call it tomorrow, whether the government in fact will put up funds that they indicated to the mayors by letter that they would intend to supply to enhance transit investment. But let me return to the bill, Honourable Speaker, because I can tell that you would like me to do that. So, greater control over management and operations. That is something that I would like to explore in committee stage, exactly what potential for control over management and operations the minister thinks that he, the government, and the ministry should have, as opposed to control over management and operations that the board theoretically has in directing the senior executive of TransLink, or the management and operations control that the Premier seems to believe rests solely with the mayors, although the mayors would likely take issue with her on that, having claimed for quite some time, since 2007 in fact, when they were unceremoniously booted off the board for exercising management and control in a way that the government of the day didn't like, and replaced with a board that meets in secret, without transparency or accountability, giving rise, I would claim, to much of the mistrust of TransLink that currently exists among residents of Metro Vancouver. So, we are consolidating ownership of finances under the Transportation Financing Authority, a provincial entity. If we go back in history, Honourable Speaker, and I intend to pursue this during a committee stage with some questions, at the time this model was put into place through a number of entities which are currently being consolidated, the provincial government actually put up 100% of the financing for TransLink, for the various lines, the Expo line, a number of other things. So it made some sense that the government, through the Transportation Financing Authority and other entities, actually had control and ownership over all the finances. But as we've seen, and as we continue to see today in the referendum/plebiscite, to humor the education minister, the government no longer puts up 100% of the funding, or even necessarily a third of the funding, unless the minister is willing to answer in estimates that that is in fact the government's intent, although we can find no evidence of it in the budget or the capital expenditure plan. What is the rationale, I would ask, and I will ask during committee stage, for government to have 100% control over assets that they in fact have not financed at 100%? I think the residents of Metro Vancouver may as well be very interested in this. I'll also be exploring during committee stage, Honourable Speaker, and I certainly would have explored it during a briefing by the ministry had one been put on offer, but unfortunately I will be taking up time, perhaps unnecessarily, in this House with a number of senior staff who probably could be better spent doing other things, who will be standing next to the minister in committee stage, exploring a number of questions that I will not have had the chance to explore in a briefing prior to rising today to speak to this bill. Could there, in fact, as a result of this consolidation and the consolidation of ownership, control, and management over the operations of TransLink and its various routes and responsibilities through this legislation, is this a precursor of possible other changes in TransLink's structure following the plebiscite, no matter what the result is? On the face of it, there's nothing to indicate that, but certainly it would appear that within the changes being made and put forward, that is a possibility. Even on an administrative change bill, Honourable Speaker, there are a number of questions that we're interested in on this side of the House that some stakeholders have raised as we've gone about trying to see and explore what the possible implications of this bill might be, to which we and others would want answers. And one of the questions would be, why now? There were numerous other opportunities to do this in the past. There have been changes to the legislation. 2007, the TransLink governance was changed. It was an opportunity to do it then, but it wasn't important then, although Nothing's particularly different now. In 2012, the then Minister of Transportation, Blair Leckstrom, introduced a number of other changes, but this wasn't on the radar at that time. And the Minister of Transportation himself in 2014 made a number of changes to legislation governing transit in the Lower Mainland, in addition to the referendum bill, which I would point out to the Minister of Transportation was in fact being referred to by government at that time as a referendum, not a plebiscite, as well as to the governance bill. No changes then. So this is, in effect, a shuffling of provincial assets. And one of the things I would like to explore in committee stage and would have explored in a ministry briefing is whether, in fact, something has changed that has made this a priority today. Is there some connection between the impending vote that's to take place in Metro Vancouver? Is there something in connection with the governance changes that have taken place? Is the minister considering possibly some future governance changes, which I might in fact be very interested in supporting, particularly if they make the operations of the TransLink board more open and transparent, more inclusive of elected accountable representation in Metro Vancouver, and of course, very importantly, addressing a number of the issues that some opponents of investment in transit have raised with respect to TransLink. Whether they're correct or not, there's certainly public perception, and public perception is usually best dealt with, especially if the public perception is one that's rooted in mistrust. That public perception is best dealt with through accountability mechanisms and transparency mechanisms. Mechanisms, I would point out, Honourable Speaker, aren't particularly present in this bill when assets are being consolidated under complete control of the minister and the minister's deputy. So, what is the issue today that has given rise to this legislation? If it's important and if it's a matter of efficiency, if it's a matter of better management, if it's a matter of enhancing the ability of government to oversee the operations and management and efficiencies of TransLink in operation of its assets, why now? This is a government that claims that it's been after efficiency since day one, the first day it was elected. It's a government that claims and takes a lot of pride in being able to run the store and run it efficiently. So why now? Has something changed? That's a question I would like to ask. I will ask it tomorrow. If the answer is not satisfactory when I meet with ministry staff, I will ask it in committee stage. And again, one of the things that I would ask the minister, and I will ask the minister in committee stage, is there's a lot of noise around TransLink and the referendum. This is a touchy time in the future of congestion relief and transit expansion and service in Metro Vancouver. We all know that investments have to be made in transit with 1 million more people coming to the region over the next 2 decades. There is significant agitation in the public around TransLink and its operations generally. Why would the minister choose the middle of this referendum as opposed to last year, or 2007, or 2012, or next year to bring in changes and potentially further muddy and cloud the waters around a referendum for which his government is solely responsible? The mayors did not request and could have potential disastrous results, at least in the short term and very likely in the medium term, both economically for all of British Columbia and particularly the region, as well as for livability in the region. Did the mayors ask for this change? It's an important question, Honourable Speaker. I would have liked to hear the minister stand up for more than 2 or 3 minutes and give a bit more background so we could understand this more fully, or frankly, I would have liked the minister to be respectful enough for the role of every member of this legislative assembly to ensure that staff at an appropriate level in the ministry could respond to a simple request for a briefing on legislation that was introduced in this House over 2 weeks ago, instead of waiting until after the day the bill was scheduled for second reading to answer legitimate questions by members elected to this chamber who have a responsibility, even on a bill that seemingly, on the face of it, is inoffensive and administrative in nature. Even on that kind of bill, Honourable Speaker, we have a job to do, and I would think it would be in the Minister's interest, and certainly the interest of British Columbians, that Ministry staff have enough respect for members of this Assembly to take the time to give a briefing to the official opposition and, in fact, to independent members of this legislature if they so requested. So, did the mayors ask for this? Do they support this? I don't know. I don't know if they know, because I don't know if they've had a briefing either. I don't know if they've had a chance to question the minister on the implications. I don't know, Honourable Speaker, whether the minister and ministry staff even think it's important that the elected representatives of people in Metro Vancouver are given the respect that they should be given to have a detailed explanation, be able to ask questions, and understand the implications of this legislation. Another question for committee stage, Honourable Speaker. Did TransLink ask for this? Does TransLink support it? Does TransLink think this will make things more efficient? Does TransLink think that this is the right way to proceed? Does TransLink think it's appropriate for the province to own assets for which it no longer puts up 100% of the financing, in fact, has not even committed to put up 33% of the financing? Did BC Transit ask for this, Honourable Speaker? Does BC Transit support this? Does it make sense? It may well make sense. But, Honourable Speaker, the minister stood up in this House for something like a minute and a half when the bill was introduced, perhaps charitably 5 minutes to open second reading of the bill. I'm sure ministry staff have many important things to do, but if this is a bill that is going to increase efficiency, be more responsive to effective and efficient use of government, i.e. taxpayers' money, if it's going to make the operations of TransLink be better, if it's going to better connect the government with the operation of all of the different forms of asset, whether it's CBus or West Coast Express or built and yet to be built rapid transit in Vancouver and south of the Fraser, of the bus fleet, of the roads, of the Patello Bridge, of the bicycling infrastructure. If all of this is important, surely, Honourable Speaker, ministry staff could have taken the time to go into some detail with myself, with other members of the opposition, with other members of this legislature, so we don't have to stand in this chamber, where there are many other things to do, during second reading of a bill about which we've received very little information from either staff, deputies, or the minister himself, and take up time pointing out for the public and the public record the important questions that could have been answered, that haven't been answered, so the people of British Columbia can know that this government has reached the point where, when they think a change is necessary, they just make it with minimal explanation, even if, Honourable Speaker, as may well be the case with this bill, it makes perfect sense. If it makes perfect sense, why were we not afforded an opportunity to get answers to simple questions? If, in fact, this is more efficient, why has Rapid Transit 2000 been kept alive for so long, Honourable Speaker? Why wasn't this done in 2007 when the board was changed, or 2012 when the minister made changes, or 2014 when the current transportation minister made changes? I would ask the minister during committee stage whether there was any consideration given to transferring these assets to TransLink itself, which might make more sense. And if so, was there an analysis done whether that would be beneficial, or whether it would be more beneficial to do what he proposes to do and transfer them to the Transportation Financing Authority? TransLink operates this infrastructure and these assets under long-term lease. TransLink is responsible in many ways for ensuring that these assets operate efficiently, that they're maintained. TransLink has to struggle with balancing the various needs of transportation in the region under a funding formula that clearly hasn't kept up with the needed investments, haven't kept up with the growth in population, hasn't kept up with congestion, hasn't kept up with what the public desires in Metro Vancouver, hasn't kept up with the regional planning processes that take place, so that I've sat in meetings at TransLink where mayors in the region have said, we built developments based on the premise that there would be transit and people would choose to take transit, and now we have developments that weren't set up for cars, where people are now making commitments to buy cars because they can't get to where they have to go any other way. It is bad for the region, it's bad for our communities, and once they make those investments in personal vehicles, they will not go back. Honourable Speaker, the Minister and his government is responsible for that state of affairs by not having the courage, the foresight, or the policy responsibility to work with the mayors in the region and make investments. So, Honourable Speaker, TransLink is asked to continually make improvements to assets that it does not own. Why, Honourable Speaker, has the government made a decision to continue the model where the ownership does not rest with TransLink, but rests with government entities and in fact is consolidating it into a government entity? It may well make perfect sense, notwithstanding the change in funding models that have taken place over time and the continually reduced interest of this government, financial interest of this government in the assets under discussion. Notwithstanding, Honourable Speaker, the continued failure of this government to act responsibly and help TransLink and the mayors in the region make the investments needed to ensure that we reduce congestion. Notwithstanding all of those facts, Honourable Speaker, it may make sense, but we simply do not know today. We might know tomorrow when we get a briefing. We could have known yesterday if we'd had a briefing, although it was Sunday. We could have known last week. If we'd had a briefing, we could have known the week before, Honourable Speaker, when we first requested a briefing, but we don't know because we haven't had answers to the questions. But in the interest, perhaps, of a little bit more efficiency than the Minister and his staff seem to think is appropriate or respectful for members of this legislature, we will be asking for a list of all of the assets in question, the ownership history, the lease history, the value of all the assets in question, any changes over time, any debts in question, and any changes over time. We might be able to get that at a briefing. I honestly can't say, Honourable Speaker, because the Ministry hasn't seen fit to give us one, so I'll put it on the record here in hopes that we will get the info tomorrow, or if not tomorrow, at committee stage. And with that, Honourable Speaker, having spoken far longer than I thought I would be able to, or than I thought would be appropriate on a bill that is strictly administrative in nature, perhaps the Minister will take from this a message back to his staff, one that he probably shouldn't have to deliver directly but may well have, is that if a bill is administrative in nature and we're trying to increase efficiencies, perhaps we should start with a little respect for the role of members of this legislature and give them a briefing when they ask for one. With that, I'll take my seat.